Welcome all. It's good to see you. As a reminder, these meetings are being recorded, and the recordings will be posted to our wiki page and YouTube channel, thanks to Shiri. Thank you for doing that. As our tradition goes, a quick roll call for folks on the screen. Just to introduce yourself, say who you are, and why you're here today. So I'll start off from my top left corner, Daniel.
Hi everyone, Danny Rolls from Bearing Node. We're a data and analytics consulting firm specializing in data and information observability. So we're working on a series of white papers and framework for data and information observability, including standards such as OpenLineage.
Thanks for coming, Daniel. Good to see you. Next on my screen is Tomasz.
Hey, Tomasz here from Getting Data. I'm an OpenLineage committer, and today I'm just here to listen and maybe, ask a question.
Thank you. Maciej.
Hello, I'm also a software engineer getting data, that's phone number. I am also an OpenLineage committer, and I have a bit of discussion about removing old versions, support for old versions of systems today.
Looking forward. Thanks, Maciej. Jens.
Yeah, hey, had to find the mute button. I'm Jens, I'm an engineering manager on Google Cloud. My team is building data lineage for Dataplex and BigQuery, and I'm here to listen in today.
Good to see you again, Jens. Pavel.
Hello, I'm Pavel. I'm software engineer at Getting Data and Astronomer, and also OpenLineage contributor and committer for like 3 years. And I'm here to tell you a bit about the recent efforts on Flink integration and extracting output and input statistics from the Spark jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Pavel. Shiri.
Hi, I am Shiri Cabral with Capital One Software, formerly Calibra, where I helped bring a private preview OpenLineage there. And I think that's it. I don't have anything I'm going to discuss today.
Good to see you, Shiri. Mike.
Hey folks, Michael Collado. I'm a software engineer at Snowflake, past OpenLineage committer, or I'll say occasional OpenLineage committer. I mostly work on Iceberg catalogs, so wanting to talk a little bit about OpenLineage and integration with Iceberg a little bit later on, if we have a chance.
Oh, committer for life, Mike. Leo.
Yeah, Leo Godin. I'm a data engineer at New Relic. Proposal contributor, hopefully code contributor soon. And now I am very interested to hear Michael's talk.
Awesome. Rahul.
Hey everyone, I'm from Atlin, a software engineer, and I'm here just for getting OpenLineage updates.
Thank you for joining. And Paul.
Hey everyone, I'm a software engineer at Datadog, so working with RL, but from France, and I'm mostly interested in just like listening to discussions.
Thanks for coming, Paul. And I will go last. My name is Harel. I'm an engineering manager at Datadog, an OpenLineage committer. I've been working on the project for a few years, and I will be the host of today's TSC meeting. As always, you can find us on all the socials.
Oh, wait, I have an agenda item I didn't think I would have. Are we considering getting on Blue Sky?
Okay. Are you volunteering to open up the account, Shiri? No, I'm kidding. I don't want to put you on the spot.
I mean, I'll open the account if somebody else has the mechanism to like cross post or something. But we can, yeah, we'll talk about it.
Good idea. All right, so on the agenda today, a quick recap from the meetup we had yesterday in New York at the Datadog office, and just a heads up on an event that we're hosting at reInvent in a month. We'll quickly go through a recent release and then dive into presentations and open discussion. So try to make this the first section very short. So yesterday we hosted, I think it was about 20 to 30 people who came to the Datadog office for a meetup. There were talks by the project team, so Julian and myself were there, as well as a presentation from Julian Lenny from Astronomer, and Igor and Ryan from Datadog. It was pretty cool. Fun was had, and I forgot to hit record, so we'll just have to do it again. It was lots of fun. For anyone who is planning to be at reInvent this year, there'll be a shared talk with AWS Datazon on how they and San Diego Gas and Electric are using OpenLineage across the board to power data reliability and compliance, which I will be speaking at. So if you're there, let me know. Quickly going over the latest release, so 1.24.2. We have added a Dataproc run facet. So actually we included job type property into the Datadog run facet. And we are now using the environment variable run facet in the core spec, and it's being used in the Python client. For Spark, there's a limit on SIG size and in an extract method for RTD path utils to avoid out of memorying. And first time contributor Masi improved the DBT sort tests, as well as avoiding tests and configurable tests. I'm actually not sure what that is, but maybe Papa will want to talk about that one. I think I did a wrong copy paste here. No, nothing to write home about. We can move on. All right, let's dig into the interesting stuff. Pavel, do you want me to present and go through the slides, or do you want to share?
Yes, please. So they're just 3 slides. So yeah. I would like to share some recent updates on our Flink integration. Perhaps Harry, if you can switch to the next slide. So I don't know if you know, but we do have an OpenLineage Flink integration for like 2 years. And it's cool for many reasons. It supports several Flink versions. It supports Kafka connector, and it's able to extract schema from data serialized with Avro, Protobuf. It supports other connectors like Cassandra and JDBC. So it's really cool because it allows organizations that like stream processing to have consistent cross-platform lineage graphs. And yeah, but it also has several things that are not that cool. Well, it was done like a proof of concept that was based on the fact that we were not able to do any modifications in the Flink code, so in the code of Apache Flink. So it relies heavily on the reflection and accessing private and protected class members through it. So it's not the best approach. It requires some code changes to be run. So if you want to turn it on, you need to modify the code of your Flink job. So it's a tiny code change, but anyway, you cannot turn it on for all the Flink jobs you have in the org. And yeah, it doesn't support extracting lineage from the Flink SQL, which is actually a pretty popular approach. So that people write SQL that reads data from streaming data sets and writes elsewhere. And fortunately, the Flink community I was thinking about it, and their conclusion was to create a proposal on how do they want to expose lineage. And yeah, I call it FlipPy because it's flip is the acronym for the Flink proposals, and 314 is the number of the proposal. And the main idea of this proposal is to allow, so sinks and source are the input and output datasets within the Flink world, and the idea is to allow sink and source implement some methods to allow extracting lineage metadata directly from those classes. And then Flink has some built-in mechanism that puts together all those sinks and sources and exposes the inputs and outputs of a job. And yeah, it exposes in a way that one can implement a Flink job listener that gets notified about it. Yeah, so this is something that really resembles the OpenLineage data model. And once this is done, the communities like OpenLineage can prepare their job listener, translate Flink lineage data model to OpenLineage, and emit the events. And this is something we are working recently. Harel, if you can switch to the next slide. So the complexity of this task is that you need to apply changes in several repositories. Like you do have the Flink core, which is like the core of the Apache Flink. Sinks and sources are within different Flink connectors, which are also different code bases. Like there's a separate connector for Kafka, for Cassandra, and etc. And on the top of it, one need to create the listener. In our case, the OpenLineage job listener. So yeah, to let's say have some brief understanding of the components. So within the Flink core, there's an definition of interfaces that will expose lineage metadata. Then there's some mechanism that creates lineage graph out of calling those interfaces. And yeah, then it exposes the lineage graphs to the job listeners. One also has to implement all the interfaces within the Flink connectors. And once this is done, one can work on the OpenLineage listener that translates it to OpenLineage event and emits and publishes through standard OpenLineage transports. And this is something that we're working for some time, and actually with a huge support of the Flink community and Peter Huang, who was also present in these calls. I don't know if he's now, I think no. So yeah, the current status is that the Flink core changes are already done. So the interface definition is already in Flink 1.19, so it's the released version. And the other changes in Flink core are merged to master, but still waiting for the official release of 2.0. Yeah, and I was working on the Flink connector Kafka to implement those interfaces to see what we can do. And I was also working on the proof of concept of OpenLineage Flink listener. And yeah, I was able to put all those bricks together and see that it's working. So, which allowed me to verify that, yes, when those Flink interfaces are implemented, we can easily translate it to OpenLineage model. And yes, we can extract a lineage from Flink SQL, which is something we were not able so far. Yeah, we have a bunch of future plans, like to implement it all in a production way. And then we need to wait for Flink 2.0 release. And meanwhile, we would like to know how to proceed with extracting column level lineage for the Flink SQL. So it's the last slide, perhaps to wrap up in the less detailed way what I was talking about. Apache Flink, which is extremely popular for stream processing, will have native lineage support, which is the best way you can expose lineage. And yeah, it's going to be working really well, I believe, because yeah, the lineage will come directly from the Flink classes. Do you have any questions or?
I just want to say this is really awesome that the Flink community leaned into the spec with us.
I mean, Pavel, I think pinged them pretty consistently. Like, what's some work?
So actually, I do have a feeling that I just put the cherry on the top of the big cake that was baked by others. And yeah, but because the flip pie was introduced by Flink community, then Maciej commented it heavily so that they could align with the OpenLineage data model and facets approach we have. Then there was Peter Huang who started implementation, and yeah, then I was able just to put all the bricks together and verify that this is going to work. So it looks pretty promising, I would say, and yeah, you can expect more of this, I hope.
And does the blog post that you just did cover this stuff too?
Yeah, it's it's the same story.
Perfect.
I'll add a link to the blog post on the slides too.
Yeah, I'll put it in the notes.
Thanks, Shiri. Okay. All right, so check it out. Thank you, Pavel. Let's keep on the agenda. Next up, we have Maciej.
Hello. So maybe let's go to the next slide already. It's also just a few slides. So we have OpenLineage integrations. Some of them are like external integrations, let's say, which is there is an Apache Airflow integration in Apache Airflow repository. There is Trino integration in Trino repository. I just want to talk about versioning, deprecation support here about those integrations that we maintain in OpenLineage repository. So as you can see, we support pretty broad range of versions in some cases, like in case of Apache Spark, Apache Flink, also Apache Airflow is a curious case. And what's generally the problem? Can I get next slide? So the problem is that we support some versions that are pretty old. They aren't really supported by the community of the project itself, like here in case of Airflow 2.5. And sometimes there is a problem with that because sometimes some stuff fails on Airflow 2.5. You have to work, put additional hours, have basically cost around maintenance to support those versions. So can I get next slide? I want to discuss some clear expectations. How long should we support those versions, right? Given like Airflow, I don't know, 2.5 release today, how long we will support it, or Spark 3 point something, right? And another goal is like remove maintenance burden for supporting those versions that aren't really widely used, and they aren't supported by other companies' projects, right? But it's not about like removing support as soon as it's possible, right? It's not about deprecating stuff to deprecate it, but just to remove a maintenance burden. And when we have to do this, it shouldn't be a surprise. So can I get next slide? Few ideas, how can we do this, right? And one is like basically deprecate support after upstream project deprecate support. So looking at Airflow, like it drops support pretty fast. So you have those Airflow extensions that are providers, and they are released independent from Core Airflow. Because Core Airflow actually supports only the latest version. So it's really non-starter. But the provider support only lasts for like 12 months since first core minor version release. And this means we are like at 2.8 in Airflow provider anymore. So if you are older than that, you don't have the official Airflow support anymore. And on the other hand, like we have Spark 2. The last release for Spark 2 was like 2021, right? It still works if you use latest OpenLineage release. And there are like other providers that support Spark 2. So I don't think like dropping support when upstream project drops support will work, because way too many people use like managed services or don't upgrade fast. I mean, everyone here probably knows how sometimes difficult is to upgrade old version of something, and how sometimes it just seems like a work without real benefits. So can we go to the next slide? On the other hand, there are like those external support companies, managed services, that provide support sometimes for a very, very long time. So you have this Spark 2.4, and AWS still supports Spark 2.4 in as EMR5, there was like release in April, I think, and previous one was a year ago in April, I think. So it's very like barely any support, but it is some support, right? And the problem with following that is also like this, they do this only for like their largest clients, maybe. And basically it would mean like AWS dictates our release cadence, right? Support version cadence. And I'm not sure if that's the best way either. But in a way, I think it's too long in some cases. So maybe we should do something else. And can I get next slide? And maybe we just should define support for integration, because the previous proposals, I think, are lower and upper bound, right? Makes no sense to support Spark 2.4 if everyone else dropped support for Spark 2.4, and it makes no sense to support it as soon as like the upstream project is contributing. So maybe we should just have some per integration definition, right? So for like Spark Link, you can commit to support last, I don't know, 4 or 5 versions. And that would give, yeah, plenty of time to upgrade. We don't have to support it forever. And as I said at the beginning, it should like be a minimal time, not like goal day after we should drop the release. But if there is consistent maintenance burden, we should be able to drop it, right? If somebody wants to commit to maintain it for longer, I don't see a point why we shouldn't keep it longer. But the goal here, right, is to discuss with you how can we clearly define that and communicate, and what should be the maybe goal time.
Yeah, I think
I don't
because
have straight answers.
because there are so many dependencies, I would say that I like the idea there's a minimal time that we guarantee we will support it for this minimum amount of time, and then after that we may or may not support it, right? Or another one might be a maximum time, right? We will do it up until this time, and the day after we will remove it, or whatever after we will remove it. If we go with the maximal time, I think there should be an exception process. Maybe some kind of like, committer could propose deprecating a version. Like, let's say, with a maximum time of, if there's any support, like on the previous slide, and then somebody says, look, there's 2 customers, of Airflow using X, and, they have lots of developers and it's failing this test, so we don't want to do 2.4 anymore. And then, there could be a technical steering committee vote on that, and then a notice period. Maybe we would deprecate it after 30 days or something. We put a notice somewhere, whether it's GitHub or Slack or something, so that we can have that kind of a process. I do think that whatever we come up with is not going to be something where if someone reads the page, they're going to know automatically whether or not every version is supported or not, right? They might know definitely things are supported, definitely versions aren't supported, but there will always be like a gray area of, if you're lucky, we're still supporting it. You might not get lucky. And I think that's okay.
Yeah, 2 things, I think. One is like, we are in this data engineering space. Lineage is important, I think, to larger customers rather than smaller ones, which gravitate towards longer support. So we should also push towards longer than shorter time. And second is that we don't remove older versions, right? If we don't, if we drop support for, I don't know, Airflow 2.3 tomorrow, you still will be able to install the previous version and get OpenLineage events, right? It's just about continuing support and providing features, stuff like that.
Right. Michael?
Hey, yeah, so a lot of projects that we integrate with have their own versioning, like lifecycle policy. So I'm just pasting into the Zoom chat here Spark's versioning policy. They actually have a release window and an end of life policy. So the last major version, or the last minor version in a major release, is going to be maintained for 31 months. But minor release branches are only maintained for 18 months. I feel like we can have a policy that accounts for the life cycle of our dependencies, or the projects that we integrate with. So rather than just coming up with arbitrary time periods, like saying we're going to support the last 4 or 5 versions, I think that we can commit to supporting the currently maintained versions of a project with options for extending beyond the EOL period, right? For like these weird cases like EMR, like if EMR is still supporting Spark 2.4, like we can try to keep up with it, but I feel like saying, hey, look, Spark 2.4 has been EOL for a year
3
now.
years.
Well, yeah, so 31 months after the last release would be like a year ago, right? I think, if I'm doing
No.
this right.
If
3?
you don't do the next release, can you
Yeah.
tell it's
Yeah.
still maintained, right?
Say that.
Because
Say it again.
Spark dropped like 2.4 to 2.8 release,
Mhm.
right? And they say they will be known further release, right? Can you say it's still
Right.
supported? I don't think so, right?
I guess the other question is, how do we define support, right? We probably will still have the binaries for people to download. And I say probably because if there's like a security vulnerability, we'll remove it and we won't build something else. So most likely we'll have the older versions in many cases, whether or not, but what does support means? Support, it sounds like, at least from your example, it means getting rid of some of the CI/CD testing or test cases. It might mean, do
Yes.
we version documentation, right? So like when we say, if we say we're going to drop Spark 2.4, what actually is being done? What are we removing?
I think 2 things. One is the CI integration, as I said. And second is you are developing new feature. Let's say you are developing the input-output statistics as Pavel is doing, and it doesn't work for Spark 3.1 or 2.4. Is it?
But that's the same as
thing?
CI testing though, isn't it?
Yes. No, I mean, kinda. Basically, no guarantee that it will work in some later version, or it might straight up break it, right?
Right.
If you develop a feature, it can just crash on like Spark 2.1 if you don't test on it, right? It's not only this feature won't work, but we don't guarantee that next OpenLineage release will work at all.
Yeah, the CI testing is really enforcing the lifecycle policy rather than the other way around. But it's okay to make a decision that knowingly breaks integration with an unsupported release.
Exactly.
Right, except we wouldn't break the integration would break and somebody would say, oh, whatever the process is, it's an old release, confirmed, let's take out those tests. Is the documentation versioned, or do we only give the latest?
We have
version of
documentation versioned, thanks to Pavel, since like
That's right. I
5
remember
months.
that. So we would also want to would we want to get rid of the documentation, or do we want that to hang around forever so people can get confused?
No. By removing support, we mean only for like next version, right? You're still able to access the older versions, use them as well as you wish, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But if you come to us and say, hey, this is a bug in that old version, we might say, okay, but try the newer version if you can't.
Yeah, and I think if a specific vendor cares about maintaining or making sure that version keeps working, then that's on them. And the project doesn't need to commit to verifying or maintaining that, right? So they can contribute to the code base. We won't, of course, accept those contributions, and as long as they're not hurting what we're doing, but we will remove the CI test, and then it will be on them to run their own testing to make sure that it works, right? I think that's a fair trade-off between the project and different vendors.
That's great.
I'm
we
actually
need to?
curious if
Okay.
Jens has any comments on that.
Yeah, I need to think about this a bit. I think Shiri asked the right question. What do we mean by support, actually? And I need to catch up with the composer folks to ask what they are thinking about this. I guess that ultimately the model is for us to move integrations rather into the code base of those systems we integrate with, right? So then the support policy would be prescribed by those anyway.
Yes.
Okay.
But in the meantime, we're still supporting, right, a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and I think this I just want to also be clear that this goes for the integrations, and I believe should also go for the clients. Right. Like, for example, from Python 2 to 3, there were a lot of, deprecations and things like that. And if we see, Python 10 has a lot of deprecations, we can, absolutely decide that once it's really kind of deprecated, right,
Yeah,
that
that's a very valid point. And here, I think that it's kind of harder to promise something more. So Python has
Right.
like a release support
The reason
version.
I said that, by the way, is because we're never going to get our stuff into core Python or core Java.
No.
Right. So that's not the model for that. That's the model for the integrations. So I just wanted to be clear on that.
We have kind of different constraint there, because the bigger problem with supporting like old Python version is not the Python itself maybe, but the tooling. So once like Python 3.8 or 3.7 dropped, I think many core tooling, like how you build the libraries, already deprecated support for it. So if we stay on this version, our like all core stuff would be potentially vulnerable to the various vulnerabilities, right? And
Right.
by following closer Python release schema, it, I think, gets rid of us those problems.
Okay, so unless anyone has anything else to add to this discussion, I do propose that we write something up and give folks time to comment. Just because I think this will need a longer time period to make a decision. But Maciej, did you have a timeline in mind for when we want to make this decision?
No, I want to get consensus really here. So I will write something and then we can discuss asynchronously.
Do you need any specific votes on we should deprecate or not, a proposal on we should deprecate this specific version because it's causing problems in the build pipeline?
I just want to have like a general.
Okay. I just want to make sure that you weren't blocked because.
No. So
okay.
In the past, we were doing like one-off stuff like this, right? So we deprecated Airflow 110 support some time ago. As I said, the goals are for us to be able to do this in a like non-very painful way, and for the users to not be surprised when you do that. That's the goals.
Okay, great discussion. Thank you, Maciej. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to move on with the agenda. And guess what? We're back to Pavel.
Hello, back again. Yeah, so I had some time to spend on statistics of the data sets read and written by the Spark job. Well, if you can switch to the next slide, please. So we do have something like the input and output dataset facets, and these are like special kind of facets that describe a dataset in the context of a run. Yeah, so they correspond to both run and dataset. So these are not dataset facets. It's like you can imagine this as if it was a record count of records being read or written by a job. Yeah, it describes both a run and a dataset. So so far we had a single facet of such kind. It was output statistics dataset facet, and yeah, it was filled with Spark integration, but I think there was an error in it and it didn't work properly. It contained like 3 metrics: row count, byte count, and files count, which is the amount of files being read or written. And yeah, recently we merged 2 PRs. They are still not released, and they bring some improvements to this area. So yeah, the PRs fix the output statistics being collected. We also add a new facet for the input datasets, and it's exactly the same. So it contains like the row count, record count, and it's the same files count and byte count. It's just it's for input, and also we are able to enrich OpenLineage events with such information for the Spark integration, which makes those events much more valuable, I would say, because there are a lot of applications and great features that you can do based on this information on the backend. Once you understand how big is your job, what volumes that is it's reading, and how big is the output of the job. So this is the work that has been already implemented and it's done. I think it's not so the amount of records read is available only for Spark v2 relations. But there can be more done with this. And actually there can be more done with this hierarchy. Go to the next slide. If we try to solve it for the specific storage provider, for the specific catalog, or table format, let's say Berber's, like Iceberg, because Iceberg provides some out-of-the-box metrics, like the scan report, which you can see on the right of the screen, that contains some Iceberg-specific metrics, which are more detailed, not only the amount of bytes written, but amount of delete files, because for Iceberg you do have files with deleted data. And so Iceberg provides scan report. It also provides a commit report. So whenever you commit a new version, you get a similar metrics, and this can be turned on in Spark with metrics reporter. So within Spark configuration, you can tell Spark to publish those metrics to implemented reporter, and a reporter can be in-memory reporter. So the problem with this is that you need to specify Spark config entry telling what to do with Iceberg metrics. And the alternative approach that I'm trying to work on is to turn it on automatically so that users don't need to add extra metric-specific Spark config property, because they will not add it, because they will not be aware of this. And to somehow turn it on automatically, then implement the metric reporter that will just gather those scans and commit reports. And then based on this snapshot ID, it can fill proper input and output dataset facets and enrich OpenLineage events with this. Additionally, I would like to add a config entry to allow turning it off in case someone doesn't want it or for any other reason. So this is something I'm working on, and as a result of this, I would like to create the Iceberg registry and define the facets specific to scan and commit report within the registry, because it's not Spark specific. I think that anyone else doing something with Iceberg can emit such facets. And this is the work in progress. I see Mike has something to say.
So this actually ties into maybe what I was thinking about earlier, and that is, so the Iceberg REST API, the catalog API actually has a report metrics API. And so when I was thinking earlier about integrating the catalog with OpenLineage metrics, this is one of those cases where we actually could take the metrics report that's sent in by Iceberg and translate it into an OpenLineage facet and augment the OpenLineage payload when it comes in. But we'd have to kind of figure out what the order of things is, whether or not the report metrics API happens before the OpenLineage payload is sent in. But it would be an interesting experiment to try it out.
Thank you. All right. So at this point, we can open things up to an open discussion. So I know, Mike, you wanted to bring up a point. Maybe we just talked about it, but perhaps there's more to add there. Or anyone else?
Not a lot specific. So I did open an issue on so Snowflake has for anybody who doesn't know, we have an open source Iceberg catalog called Polaris that we launched in the summer. So I did create an issue on the Polaris GitHub repository to integrate support with OpenLineage. I know that OpenLineage has an issue already open from what's the other open source catalog? I can't remember the name of it right.
Unity.
Gravitino.
No, Gravitino. That's it. Yeah, Gravitino's opened an issue with OpenLineage because they want to also have support. So in my mind, you know, the catalog, the Iceberg catalog has a lot of information about the data sets that are being accessed in a given Spark job or a Flink job. So I think the catalog has an opportunity to augment the OpenLineage payload. So, you know, this could be done by either pulling information from the catalog directly or using the catalog as kind of a proxy by sending it the OpenLineage payload that already has been constructed, and then the catalog could kind of augment it with additional information about the data sets or possibly these scan metrics like Pavel was just talking about. But I know that Snowflake has some interest in at least messing around with this. Somebody was pinging me yesterday about working on it as a hackathon project next month. And I don't know if other folks have considered messing around with it or trying different things.
I'm curious about spoke about sending the OpenLineage event to Polaris catalog to enrich it. I'm curious how would it work in practice. Interesting idea.
Yeah, so I was kind of envisioning Polaris as a proxy, similar to there is a Java proxy that already exists in the OpenLineage repository, right? Which I think Shiri wrote, if I remember right. So in that way, like it would be similar, right? Where Polaris wouldn't actually be responsible for collecting or doing anything with the lineage data. But it could just augment the payload and then proxy it onto a different endpoint like Marquez.
That would still mean that Polaris has to understand the OpenLineage schema, right? To like understand what data sets it manages from those that we send there and enriches it appropriately. Right?
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, definitely not suggesting that Polaris itself would be OpenLineage like or lineage agnostic. It would be very specific to OpenLineage. But yeah, the alternative, like I said, would be having the client side pulling information from Polaris, and then augmenting the payload before it sends it off to Marquez.
Yeah, I'm just curious, like how many systems integrate with Polaris, really? So like I imagine it works from Spark, right? So from Spark you would configure OpenLineage to send the events to Polaris, then you could enrich it. But like if you have something that is integrated with Polaris, like maybe tangentially, right? It's not center of your data really, but maybe one team in your company uses Polaris somewhere. Would it be like the best way? It kind of centralizes you the OpenLineage like event management process.
Yeah, so Polaris is an implementation of the Iceberg REST spec. So the spec is actually defined in the Iceberg project. So any Iceberg client should speak the same REST spec. So we don't we don't have to worry about Spark in particular, right? Supporting it, but Flink not. Like anything that integrates with Iceberg will integrate with Polaris. And then similarly for the OpenLineage endpoint, right? Like we would just implement the OpenLineage endpoint that's defined in the OpenLineage spec. So it would not actually be specific to Polaris, right? So from the client side perspective, as far as the client understands, it's talking to a OpenLineage endpoint and it's talking to a Iceberg REST endpoint. Whether those happen to be the same server And whether they happen to be built on Polaris is actually not really important.
Makes sense. I just, wondering how this would tie with different implementations, right? Somebody uses Iceberg and Polaris only like tangentially, maybe.
I think that in some near future, I will need to implement a hook mechanism for Spark integration. So something that allows you to inject your code and manipulate the event before it gets sent. Perhaps it can be a solution to the second approach you mentioned.
We were
Mike.
talking
But
before,
again,
right, about making this like more client specific rather than integration specific, right? So now you can kind of do this by implementing your own custom transport that receives an event, and you can do whatever you want with this event. Really, a transport interface just gives you the event. And, but if we think about like maybe there are some cases where you just want to mutate the event somehow, and then pass it further to some real transport to not have like re-implement everything else in the transport. And maybe that would be a solution. Kind of send the event to Polaris, receive it back, and then like send the end return somewhere else. That's a good idea, I think.
And then your client would be specifically dependent on a Polaris endpoint, right? You'd have
probably,
some
yeah.
custom Polaris endpoint that augments the data and then actually sends it back.
Yeah, probably something like that. Just not sure if like Polaris is the best place to configure how you route your events. It feels like it's a source of data rather than proxy, maybe in my mind.
Sure. Yeah, I mean it is like so the catalog generally has a lot of information about the data sets. And so, right, like it has insight into the data set versioning and like the owners of the data and all of this kind of other stuff, permissions and everything. And so it is, it's really easy to think, okay, well, the catalog has all of this information, let the catalog augment the OpenLineage endpoint. But then there is you're right, kind of, there is a risk of saying, well, the catalog knows a lot about the data sets, but maybe the orchestrator knows a lot about the jobs. And so should the orchestrator also proxy the information? As opposed to saying, okay, well, maybe the orchestrator needs an endpoint and the catalog needs an endpoint. But then the client is responsible for orchestrating between those two. That's an alternative.
I'm wondering, sorry, I got off camera because I've been sick. So I'm wondering if the catalog has what we could consider a canonical version for the data set. Like that's a challenge for interoperability between different tools is how do you get a version? How do you know which version is the right version? If a data set is in, say, Spark, and then you access it in Trino later on, but the catalog could provide that. But now you have a real timing issue, right? You need the job to run so the catalog can create the version ID, and then the client has to go and get that.
Yeah, I mean, Iceberg does have, right, like it has snapshot IDs already. So when you manipulate a data set, it already does create its own data set version ID. But you're right, the catalog does have a canonical view in that, like, so for example, like Polaris and Gravitino both support other, like exposing other catalogs through a single pane of glass, right? So you could have, for example, a glue catalog or a Hive catalog, and then proxy them through Polaris. So that way all of your access goes through a single endpoint, but then you can actually federate your Iceberg requests to these different backing catalogs. Now, so from the client's point of view, like, what's the authoritative name of that data set, right? Like, what's the real namespace? Is it the Hive Metastore server? that's backing it, or the glue endpoint that's really backing it, or is the Spark client really just going to put the namespace of the catalog that it's using to access the data, right? This is where like the catalog actually having a canonical understanding of what the real authoritative identity of the data set is becomes really useful.
And there's also a discussion whether that really exists. Like you have a physical and logical path to some data set, right name. They are both in a way valid, right? The I think correct version is to tie them up in symlink dataset facet that we already have.
Yeah, but to get a real like accurate lineage view, right, you want that canonicalization.
Of course, like to represent it, right? But then if somebody reads the data some other way, via, let's say, this Hive or glue catalog, right? Then it should also be like, the OpenLineage consumer should know that it's the same data set, just represented differently.
Yes, right, exactly, yeah. Yeah, and that's where I kind of feel like the catalog has a role in augmenting the OpenLineage payload to really just say like this is the actual identity of the data set. I don't care what Spark tells you it is. It's really glue, or it's really Hive or whatever.
So like within an environment, you would choose one. One catalog is the main catalog with canonical definitions.
I mean, you can also have all the information, then have the end consumer decide what's the authority, maybe.
Yeah, but the events coming in have to match up somehow, right? That's what I'm talking about, is just ensuring that there's something that that an event from one tool can match an event from another tool.
Yeah, and there really is nothing preventing you from calling different catalogs from the same job. So maybe that is a good reason for the client to be responsible for collecting all of that information from the catalog rather than allowing the catalog to augment it directly. Because if you have two different catalogs, right, like one Polaris endpoint and one a glue endpoint, maybe Polaris can't really augment the information about the glue data set because it doesn't know anything about that glue data set.
But I kind of like the idea that you can just send the event to the catalog and let it augment it the way it fits, rather than us having to like send some subset of metadata, right? And then make the client integrate it as well as the client wants, right?
So I'm pretty sure we'll end up with having two approaches, because both of them serve different customers or companies interested in different ways. So yeah, it's just a matter of time which one will be first to be implemented.
We are coming up at the end of this TSC meeting. So as we get more next steps here, we'd love to have this discussion on Slack or next TSC meeting. Depends on how fast we go.
Yeah, so I mentioned I already have an issue on the Polaris side. I'll open an issue on the OpenLineage side and see if there's interest in having a like Polaris endpoint specific client that would fetch information to augment as opposed to allowing Polaris to proxy. Yeah, both approaches I think are worth considering. It really just depends on how much client specific or how much server specific information we want in the OpenLineage side as opposed to OpenLineage specific information on the Polaris side.
Okay. So this will be the only open discussion item since we are out of time. But it was great seeing everyone. Looking forward to seeing you at the next TSC meeting. Keep the conversation going on Slack too, or on issues or pull requests. until next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.